Yeah, brother.
Kien, my brother, how you doing?
Doing good. Loving the energy as well. I love Friday flow. It's got such a alliteration, such a nice little flow to it. Uh,
Brother, I love that aspect that you just mentioned that because that's the whole thing. I just want to have a little nice conversation on flow. And I know with you, it's going to be a great conversation as we had a little chance to connect previously. I was blessed enough to be on your podcast, which was a great show, and the energy was just palpitating. And I'm like, yo, bro, I need to get you on my show just to kind of ask you some questions to get to know you a bit more.
you got it,
Uh,
brother.
So before jumping in, let me just take a few seconds to introduce you. So Kien Vuu, he's a physician, a doctor. He doesn't only do that. He has a podcast. He has a book, as you're seeing over both of his shoulders right now, which we'll talk about. And he had a great story of how he became a doctor from being an immigrant, his experience with health, and so on and so forth. And for your community who doesn't know me, my name is Christopher Dedeyan. I'm a professional speaker and a peak performance coach. So my brother, first and foremost, how you doing, man?
Dude, I'm doing great. I am on a Friday flow session with you, and the energy is magnetic, and I'm just flowing off of it. So it's feeling really, really good.
And the first thing I want to say, I just noticed right before you were on your own live, and I thought, I'm like, oh my God, he's making a mistake. He's going on his own live, but you were actually promoting this conversation. So first time I guess I did that, I'm like, yo, spot on, marketing 101. Brother, first of all, tell me, how is it going in the medical world right now? And that's a very vast question in itself. But just tell me your ideologies. What are you seeing within the medical field right now that you love? And what are you seeing in the medical field that you think that there's room to improve? Let's start with that.
Oh, sounds good. Well, I mean, there is just so much that's out there now. There's biohacking that we didn't have before. There is gene um, gene splicing where we could take faulty genes and change them up. So we've got so many advances in the medical field that I believe could push us into living 120 years, 150 years, and have us increase our health span as well. I think that part is great. We're always pushing technology forward. But then the thing is, we're missing, the thing about advancing medical health sometimes is we're missing out on ancient wisdom of what we know actually, leads to somebody living a fulfilling life. We are not talking about things that are filling up our cup, both physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. All those things are super, super important as well. And as we start to align our lifestyle around those things, we actually have more control of our health and how our DNA is being expressed than we actually think. And that's what my book is all about. I love the advances, we're taking in medicine, but at the end of the day, if we could show up, as better versions of ourselves, if we could be a little bit more conscious about how we create our lives, those conscious choices, what we actually do speaks to our DNA in a moment to moment basis. And no matter all these different advances that are happening outside of us, here's the cool thing, that at the end of the day, it is you and me that are our best medicine.
Okay, so that is starting off very strong from talking about advancements, from talking about genomes, how they're changing, and having a potential in life to potentially live up to 120, 150, and so on and so forth. And I have a question within that. First and foremost, is that something that we're going to see in our lifetime? Are we going to potentially see these actually things happen with our generation of potentially living up to that point? Number one. Second question, as you're alluding to everything that we can control, almost like kind of Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about the
Yeah.
placebo effect and so on and so forth, and we can control our own health. What do you think we should do better to correlate, let's call the Western medicine, which we're talking about, and as well as the Eastern medicine? And is there something to learn with both of those? So pretty
Absolutely.
heavy questions, but go
Yeah,
for it. I
yeah,
know you
yeah.
got
So,
this.
so the question is it within our lifetimes? Yes, I
Yes.
believe it is within our lifetimes. Hey, look, I'm in my 40s, and you're a little bit younger than me, but definitely with all the advances that we have right now, I think regularly. People will reach their hundreds, will reach to 120, potentially even past that within our lifetime. We have all of this stuff going on. If you guys follow myself, you guys follow David Sinclair or David Asprey or Sergey Young, those are some people to follow. The technology that you will hear about will definitely put us there in our lifetime. So the next question is, we've got all these advances in medicine, but yet we have these things that we're forgetting. How do we start to marry the two? And I think, platforms such as this is so important because we can start talking about that. If you start to follow people like Joe Dispenza, you'll start to understand that it's our conscious living, it's our energy is now we're exuding not only outward, to attract the things that we want in our life, but we're also sending that energetic signal inward. And there are basically two main signals we can give our body. We could tell our bodies we are doing exactly what we need. We're happy, we're joyous, we're sending messages to ourselves that, hey, things are good, go ahead and heal. Or we're giving ourselves the stress signals. And if we give ourselves stress signals, they kind of hunker down. They basically say, okay, we got to watch out because there's a virus coming on, or there's a saber-toothed tiger there behind us. Let's prepare for danger. When that happens, inflammation goes up, our immune system goes down. That's when we get chronic disease. That's when we get chronic symptoms. That's when we don't feel our very, very best.
So I love everything you just mentioned over here. And actually somebody said, no thanks to 150, which is actually, I'm sure, going to create a lot of debate in the future as well, to be like, hey, Are we playing with life? Should we live it more natural, and so on and so forth? That's a whole other subject. But I want to talk about what you just said on the latter end of what you just mentioned, on the aspect of that our mindset controls our health in such a high level. How do you present this as a physician, as a doctor, to your patients in itself? Is this something you talk about actively, or honestly, maybe you do, maybe you don't, I don't know? Are doctors prone to not talk about those things because, and I could be wrong here, I just want to know your opinion, but there's certain ideology that they need to be pushing certain medicines and so on and so forth. So where do you stand within that? What do you speak to that?
Yeah, great question. I think initially, look, when I got trained in medical school, we were taught there are symptoms and we treat these symptoms with these medications. And unfortunately, I do believe that a lot of that training was a lot of pharmaceutical companies, spewing their studies, and they work to a certain degree, but they don't really address the underlying root cause. There's all these symptoms that are happening, yes, but why are these symptoms happening?
Yeah.
I'm going to tell the story of myself. A couple years ago, 5 years ago, I was overweight, I was diabetic, I was hypertensive, I had low sex drive, my skin was looking, I look older than I actually was, and I was on prescription medications. And we're not actually taught to address those root causes. And it wasn't until I take a deep dive and started to understand a little bit more about what health and wellness really, really was. So I went in deep on epigenetics, on nutrition, on mindset, on spirituality, and I started to understand what actually controls how our cells behave. And it turns out that if we know what our DNA is asking for, we can give that to our DNA. And that's going to give us optimal health. That's going to give a longevity and peak performance. And if we're not aligned with what our DNA is asking for, and we live these stressful lives, and lives that we're not meant to live, then our cells are going to think that we're in stress. All right. And here's the thing. So your question was, how do I bring that up? Initially, I didn't know how to bring this up because I didn't learn about it. But now the science is starting to catch up to us. So what do we know? We know that emotions basically creates biochemical messengers and mediators in our body. So if we feel angry, when we feel anger, when we feel fear, when we feel anxiety, when we feel hate, when we feel all these negative emotions, it actually brings up inflammatory markers. It raises cortisol in our body, which is a stress hormone, which basically increases inflammation. So there's all the other markers, IL-6, TNF alpha, those are inflammatory molecules. That actually happens when you feel those things, all right? And so what happens when that stress response goes up? Inflammation goes up, immunity goes down, cells don't function very well. That's when you get the chronic symptoms and your chronic disease. Your question was, how do I then talk to them about the mindset? Well, if feelings create these biochemical changes that actually talk to our body, what do our thoughts do? What do our mindset do? Well, here's the thing. Our mindset, what we believe about the world, what we focus on, that tends to lead us to how we feel, right? So if in your mind you're thinking, okay, there's that story of, things are happening to me, I'm a victim, all of a sudden you're going to start to feel that stress, that anxiety, that worry. And again, when you start to feel that, what will happen? Chronic disease, chronic symptoms, you run that stress response. Whereas if you start to flip the switch, okay, let me not focus on that. What if instead, in my mind, this is not happening to me? What if it instead, like Byron Katie and Tony Robbins says, what if this was happening for me? Oh, wow, okay. Or this pandemic's happening for me? I went through this exact same thing last year. When my bank accounts did all of this and my private practice went down when the pandemic first hit. How's this happening for me? Then I was like, wow, I actually have time now to spend with my fiance at home. I now actually have time to get to know my bonus daughter that she included into our lives to grow this family. And I get to, get this time to connect with them and build this love for them. And if I start to flip the switch, all right, nothing outside has changed. None of the circumstances have changed, but it's what I start to focus on, what I start to create meaning on. That's the mindset. All of a sudden, you start to feel different. All of a sudden, fear, anxiety, worry, all that inflammatory state in your body, if you could start to feel joy, if you could start to feel gratitude, if you could start to feel connection, if you could start to shift into those emotional states. Because if those other emotional states are inflammatory, those positive emotional states, that's anti-aging medicine. That actually causes healing in your body.
Man, I love this conversation, and you're so eloquent in the way that you explained it. And at the same time, you know what? This conversation frustrates me. Now, let me explain why. It frustrates me because there's a lot of people that don't know this, and that's what frustrates me. Because I'm listening to a physician that 5 years ago or X amount of years ago, you weren't healthy, you had negative health markers and so on and so forth, and you are in a professional in the field, and then you realize, how am I going to get this information? And you went with the mindset aspect of understanding how epigenetics works, which we want to talk about, understanding how to create certain realities of like, hey, what are the words that I'm telling myself that really dictate inside of me? These are things that are tried and true. Dr. Emoto explained it with how they remember within the waters and all this stuff. Like, all of these are things that you're saying that are 100% true. Now, how can we change the whole narrative in this ideology to understand this and not go towards the world of consumption with medicines and so on and so forth? And that being said, I'm somebody that believes in the Western medicine that we feel. Like, I mean, if a bone pops out of your body and you're looking at it, you could talk about it until tomorrow morning or wish it to go in, it's not going to go in. So you do need certain things. But there's a lot of things that you could fix internally even before pills. So talk to me about more the epigenetic side and how to actually do it. So you talked about it happens. Now, how can we do it? So somebody is unhealthy. How can they start thinking themselves, acting themselves towards being a healthy person?
Okay, very good question. So we talk about epigenetics. What is that? All right. So it tells us, look, we have DNA in our body. We basically get one strand from mom, one strand from dad. But the DNA basically is like the entire playbook, for all the sports fans that are out there. It's the entire playbook that's there. You don't play all the plays at once. It's strategically, okay, I'm going to play this play now. I'm going to play that play at that point. And it's how you play that playbook is whether or not you win the game. Very similarly, our genes, the DNA we get from mom and dad is basically all the plays, but we're not playing them, all at once, right? That's why we have different cells in our body, right? Cells are different because not all genes are being turned on and turned off at the same time. You've got to turn on the right genes at the right time and turn off the bad genes, most of the time. So there's that talk. So what you get from mom and dad isn't fixed. It's how those genes are being played. So the next question is, how are those genes being played? So it turns out that your DNA is constantly listening to the energetic environment around it. I call that the bioenergetic state. All right. And based on that energetic environment, there's actually the DNA gets marked and tagged based on that energetic environment. So that energetic environment can tell your DNA we're in danger, or that energetic environment will tell our DNA, hey, it's safe. This is time to grow. Let's turn off all the bad genes. Let's make the right plays now. And so what are the most important factors that speak to our DNA? There are 7 things that I talk about in my book, Thrive State. There's sleep, nutrition, movement, stress and emotional mastery, relationships, our thought and mindset, and a sense of purpose. Those 7 things are like the 80-20 rule, to determine our bioenergetic state. The other 20%, like, infections, like allergies, like, heavy metals, things like that are less of our control. But these 7 things you and I can control. That dictates our genetic expression. And if you can master those 7 things, you basically can master this bioenergetic field you give to your cells. And you could actually tell your cells, hey, we are actually in a thrive state. So let's have optimal health, longevity, and peak performance. That's what happens when you can master these things. This is the power of epigenetics. Epigenetics tells us that we are in control of our DNA.
Wow. Okay, so that is so interesting because we are in control of our DNA and understanding it. And I love the way you just broke it down, the analogy of like a sports team in a sense, and you have all the playbook, but you only use certain like plays at the right moments. And this is what essentially epigenetics kind of comes down to. What do we need to do to activate those plays though? That's what we're talking about. Is it through meditation? Is it through the food we're eating? Is it through the people we're hanging around with? So we're listening to the proper information, what we're consuming. So what would be the step-by-step play to control that?
All right, great question. So those 7 things I talked about: sleep, nutrition, movement, stress and emotional mastery, our thoughts, mindset, relationship, and purpose. Those are those 7 things that are most important. What makes up all those 7 things are our habits. Our habits dictate our bioenergetic state. So we need good habits in each one of those 7 categories. So where do you begin? So we want to have good habits in each one of those categories, and we need to get out of bad habits of each one of those 7 things. So, if you read the book, you'll have basically a list of all these different things that you can do. But how do you start? You start by picking the easiest thing, the thing that's going to require no energy from you and no resistance from you to start. I don't know what that is for that person. Is it skipping breakfast? Is it getting rid of sugar? Is it meditating? You're going to have a lot of these things when you go through my book, but the thing is, these are all habits in each one of these 7 categories. And step number 1 is to pick the easiest thing for you to implement, and just implement that one thing. Is it getting rid of a bad habit, or is it installing a good habit? When you do that one simple thing, what you will do is you start to shift everything altogether. Say, for example, for me, it's like trying to get an extra hour of sleep. If you get that extra hour of sleep, guess what happens? It will shift basically all the hormones in your body. All of a sudden, the energy starts to shift. When you start to shift and you have that momentum and you have already changed your biology, it makes it easier for you to take on the next habit and the next habit and the next habit. So at the end of the day, it's just a mastery of habits in these 7 different areas of your life. And where do you start? You start with the simplest one. That's going to give you bioenergetic momentum to take on the next one and the next one and the next.
I love the way you just explained, Kien, like the aspect that there's 7 things that you have to look at, those 7 areas in your life, and then start placing the proper habits and rituals within them. And the best way to start about it is the minimal viable effort. Essentially start with the thing that's going to demand the less effort from you, and it's going to compound over time for bigger and bigger action. And one last thing before we kind of dive into what you do, your practice, how do you support your clientele and your community? We did mention, and you did mention one of the 7 things of like food, right? What you eat and so on and so forth. And obviously you're a physician, you're a doctor. What is your ideology of diet culture and dining in general? What would you speak to that? Because you did mention as well skipping a meal, which I'm guessing you were referring to intermittent fasting. So I want to know what your thought is on that end.
Yeah, great question. I mean, we basically, if we start to just understand how we evolved as human beings, we evolved basically from our caveman, days, and And our DNA is written in such a way where we eat similar to what they eat, and that
Mm-hmm.
actually is good for our health. So back in the day, did they eat 3 meals a day? They didn't. They didn't eat 3 meals a day because there was food sometimes, and then there wasn't food some other times, right? And so when there was an animal that they were able to kill, and they shot down that animal, they were maybe able to eat for a few days. But all of a sudden, maybe they didn't have meat for a few days, but they were able to forage some berries or whatnot. So our ancestors had, areas of times of feast and famine, and they had something called metabolic flexibility. So there were days that they were able to, eat the berries and go off of carbs, and then they were able to build up some fat, and then were days that they didn't have any food, and then they were actually able to burn their own fat for fuel. So this is metabolic flexibility. When we've lost that ability to do that, and when we lose that ability to do that, we basically started to include foods we're not used to eating: sugar, processed foods, and people are eating all the time. And what happens there is when you're eating sugar and processed foods, your body is just burning fat, or sorry, just burning, sugar and not fat. You lose that flexibility, and that's not something our body's used to. That's actually what causes insulin resistance down the road, and that's what causes obesity and a bunch of chronic disease. So when I say missing a meal, our bodies are designed to go through this feast and famine. But what we're doing is we're just feeding our body too much all the time and a bunch of junk. What should we include in our body again? Again, it's the same things our ancestors were eating: real food, whole foods, minimally processed, eat lots of plants. That's what our ancestors did. And then if you do eat meat, which, I'm a proponent of, make sure you try to get it from clean, sustainable sources: grass-fed, grass-finished meats that are, not from industrial farms, because those meats are more inflammatory. But, that's it. It's pretty simple.
I love that. I love that because everything you just mentioned, first of all, you explained in a very good way why intermittent fasting is something that was just normal for us in the evolution of the Homo sapien and where we're at right now in our consumption age. Like, who says we have to eat 3 days? It's marketing that brought it to this point, and we accepted it as people.
Yeah.
And I 100% understand that. I love the fact that you mentioned, there's certain foods that are good for people and all that. Try to eat as much as possible things that come naturally. And I love the grass-fed, grass-finished. And the best way that I talk about that, try it on yourself. Like, I've tried myself. Veganism didn't work for me. I've tried a vegetarian diet, worked a bit more. And I have that balance in between, like a pescatarian to meat and so on and so forth. So you have to really try and see what works for you. Now, Kien, I mean, you are an abundance of information. Yeah, we could talk until tomorrow morning. I'm already seeing the time kind of go by here, but I really want to kind of highlight and talk about what you do on a daily basis with your customers, because I know that you don't only do your physician work, you don't only do your doctor stuff. Talk to me a bit about what you do on the coaching side of things and how you support people that way.
Oh, so great question. My girl Nita dropped in. I got to give her some love, Nita. I love
Let's
that.
go.
I love the heart. Boom, boom, boom. To you. Okay, so great question. So I run a concierge practice, and I support people in multiple different ways. I've got the concierge part of my practice where I go to a celebrity gym. So a lot of people that go to that gym, I work with some celebrities in terms of optimizing their health. But there's different levels, right? One, understand the bioenergetic state. Again, if you could understand this one concept, that our choices, our habits, how we live every day, and how we show up for ourselves and for other people, create this bioenergetic state in our body that actually talks to ourselves. This you could learn in this book, and it's absolutely free. All right. And what I do when I work with people personally, one-on-one, is work on those lifestyle things first. Because if you don't change those things, if you don't work on the lifestyle aspects, you're basically got holes in your boat. And you could put in more gasoline or whatever, but if you got holes in your boat, you're basically kind of almost like driving with the brakes on, right? So get rid of those holes, change those lifestyle things first. And then the people that basically come to me, like the celebrities and the CEOs that want to basically get to that next level, then we look at their labs. Where are their hormone levels? Are there any micronutrients that are missing? Is there inflammation that we're not addressing? I do a full, complete workup in terms of looking at their labs. This is after they work on the lifestyle stuff that's free. And then we start to optimize, you know. A lot of times men over the age of 35 or 40 will start to feel like, oh my God, like, you know, age is starting to creep up. I don't got that pep. I don't got that spunk again. Yes, I'm doing all the right things. And that's what we do is optimize people by optimizing their hormones, maybe getting them on these things called peptides, which are really the craze in anti-aging and performance medicine these days.
I love that. I love that so much. And we're definitely going to talk about that in the future and have somebody asking over here, where can
Yeah.
we go get some of these genetic tests? Like, what would you suggest to really find out? And then look at, hey, like you said, you use the example of somebody that's like a man that's 35, 40. Where's their testosterone level? Should they take testosterone booster? Should they take X, Y, and Z? So where can we go to get some of these testings?
Yeah, yeah. So what I would probably say is this. I mean, unless you are really into the functional medicine and you understand this yourself, I would recommend work with somebody, work with, you know, an integrative physician such as myself, or somebody who's gone through the training to walk you through the process. So you're not going to get these labs yourself, because it's there. I got to admit, they're going to be hard to interpret. So find, you know, somebody who's a functional medicine physician, integrative physician, who understands more of the, you know, understands and a little beyond these traditional medicine people that just look at symptoms, right? And then you have that person run a full gamut of tests. And what would that initial gamut of tests be? There would be probably a complete blood cell count to just kind of look at your blood, all your insulin resistance markers, including fasting glucose, fasting insulin, hemoglobin A1C. They're probably going to be taking inflammatory markers such as CRP and things like that. They'll be looking at your lipid panel. That's just a basic general thing. And then when you tell them how you're feeling and your symptoms, they might be adding additional things like testing your stool, testing telomeres and things like that. But, you know, again, probably a little complicated, you know, unless you're really, really into it. So find somebody that has done the training who could help you and guide you through that path.
Keen, I was on board until you said testing your stool. I'm like, wait a minute. I'm like, let's get this stuff started. But up to that point, I don't know about that. But that being said, honestly, it's really interesting. I'm like, yo, I want to get into this and try it out, because like you mentioned, there's a lot of things that we could do to get healthier, to feel better, and so on. And one last question that I have over here, actually two last ones, and I want to be respectful for your time here. You talked about these CEOs that are coming up to these C-suite people, these anybody that really wants to get more on track of their health, their energy, and so on and so forth. We do know everybody's age, chronological age, but there's something called a biological age, which is what we're essentially talking about here. How much can a gap be with the work that you're putting into play with somebody's chronological age? So that means how old you are in time towards your biological age, which is how actually your body is. So I'm 32, I could be biologically a 27-year-old, so on and so forth. So how far can that gap be from what you've seen with some of your clients and where you've brought them?
Yeah, so you know, a lot of times people would start off and they might be a couple years older than their actual biological age. So what's the test we do for that? It's actually called the Horvath methylation test, or a methylation epigenetics test. And what happens is this: we live a certain lifestyle, and what happens with our lifestyle is we start to get these little tags onto our DNA based on how we live our life. And these little tags, depending on where they are and what genes they are, actually tells us our biological age. And when we can measure that, we could actually tell somebody what their biological age is, and we could actually guesstimate when they're going to pass away, right? So before I started the process, you know, I already started to get into biohacking and things like that. I was a couple years younger. You know, hey, I'm in my mid 40s, but biologically, I'm as old as you right now.
Let's go.
Let's go. That's right. So, I mean, you could notice a big difference. And again, you know, just changing a lot of your lifestyle factors, you can start removing some of those tags off your DNA. And you start doing the right things.
That is amazing. That is amazing. So you're legit 12 years younger than your chronological age of what you're saying over here, which is amazing. Yeah. So my brother, this is amazing. I'm definitely going to pick up your book, as you referred to it a lot. And there's a lot of things that what you just mentioned over here. I'm like, yeah, I have to jump into it. So I'm highly going to suggest other people, if you guys saw some value, go check that out. And one last thing, Kevin, where can people connect with you? Like, where can we guide these people that are listening, that are interested, that maybe want to get followed by you, that want to get tested? So where can they connect with you?
Great question. So I am on all social media channels at Kien Vuu MD. That's, if you're following here, follow that. You'll find me on YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. You could get a copy of your book, Thrive State. In fact, get the first 3 chapters free. Go to thrivestatebook.com. You could download the first 3 chapters so you don't have to wait for the book getting to you, but get the whole book at thrivestatebook.com. And then you can find everything I'm offering, from my podcast to my online course that will get you to Thrive State faster. You can find all that at my website, kienvuu.com. That's KIENVUU.com.
Kien, I mean, thank you very much for your time, brother. The wisdom that you dropped was just phenomenal. We're probably going to do this again because there were so many things
I would love to, man. Super fun.
Yeah, definitely a lot of things I want to unpack. So that being said, thank you very much for blessing us with your knowledge and your time, brother. Truly appreciate it.
All right. You got it, brother. See you again.
All right. Ciao, ciao.